All right, well, we're going to wrap up today with a summation from David Fukutomi, president of the SOP Consulting LLC, and he'll be sharing his thoughts about the journey we took today. There was so many great speakers and panels and discussion, so we'll revisit some highlights, hearing from David. David is an advisor to federal, state, and local government and the private sector, specializing in disaster resilience, multi-agency and multi-jurisdictional coordination, complex disaster response and recovery, and innovation use of existing authorities, defense support of civil authorities, fostering collaboration and public policy. So, thank you, David.
Okay, thanks. So, let me use one. You don't want to see any more slides. So let me give you a couple of highlights. So I'm going to give you a couple of highlights. I'm going to mention briefly a success story here in Ventura County and then issue a challenge. So, we started out today with some good points from our opening speakers. And one of the things that struck me is when Alan Salazar mentioned that we have to protect the land. And I would say that resonated with me a lot. We have to protect the land because by doing that, we also protect the people. And as a third-generation Ventura County resident, I appreciate that we've enjoyed here a very aggressive approach by our fire departments and our government in terms of land use and defensible space, but it's starting to multiply into fire-safe councils. And we talked a lot about fire-safe councils. Chief Gardner, who's also my neighbor, talked about the growing complexities in terms of the threats that we face. And one of the things that is going to be really important, and I'll talk about this in just a minute about talking about this, is that we're headed into rough times in terms of the budget. Katie mentioned that the federal funding for the BRIC program was cut. If you see what's going on in Washington right now, you see that, what are they talking about? How to cut budgets, how to manage the size of the federal budget. We've already seen here that we had a $35 billion or more deficit in Sacramento, right? CAL FIRE folks are nodding their heads. We've been through, if you've been in state government, the rises and fall of state funding. And what's the first thing to go? Discretionary spending. And what's funding this from the state level? Discretionary spending, right? So if there's not a fire actually burning at that time, the money that's being allocated from the legislature and approved by the governor, whoever the governor is at great risk until something bad happens. Chief Pemlott and I, especially when I was at CAWFC, we toured dozens and dozens of towns, and it was sad, and I don't care, and for those of you in the fire service, you don't get over going to there and talking to people knowing how tragic it is, whether it's one house or 1,000 or 5,000. But we were always on the operations side, on the after, responding to, recovering from, and then looking to mitigate. What we've been focusing on here at this conference, and today you heard a lot of great ideas about how to get ahead of this, all right? And so that's really important. I won't go through the whole thing. In fact, what I'm going to highlight is tonight at the reception, you're going to get a copy or make copies available at the Pacific Coast Business Times. You're going to hear from Henry Dubras. There's a table in there that talks about the Consolidated State Managed Debris Program, which is a long-time partnership between CalOAS and CalRecycle. And the case study that I would refer you to is from the Thomas Fire here in Ventura County. And the fact that at the time, as you might have known for for 7 months, it was the largest wildfire in California history, eclipsed quickly by other fires, and then seemingly every other fire after that. But at the time, that was a success story because literally 99% of the eligible residential property owners opted into the state-managed debris program that was funded primarily by the state at the time, later picked up by the federal government when we got a presidential disaster declaration. But what I want to talk about that is why it was such a success. It was a collaboration between the cities of Ojai, Ventura, and the county of Ventura. It was collaboration with the state of California, multiple agencies, and ultimately with federal agencies as they came aboard in the Presidential Disaster Declaration. But let me tell you the bottom line of that. So roughly 1,100 properties were addressed through that. from the start of the fire until the last property was cleared was 6 months. You say, well, that sounds like a long time. What other government program do you know has started up from zero and completed in 6 months? 1,100 properties were cleared. So that meant and the process is outlined in the emergency preparedness guide, hazardous materials were removed, all right? That's important to allow the people that lost virtually everything in the fire to go back and try to find some remnants, some keepsakes, some heirlooms in there. Those of you, you can open your bathroom or kitchen cabinets. You have a veritable hazardous material dump site in there. Now imagine applying heat to it. That has to be safely removed, and that's done in California by California Toxics. And then, with the property owner's consent, CalRecycle leads a team in there that goes in and removes the rest of the hazardous debris on the property. So what do you get back? You get back a lot that is ready to build on. In 6 months' time, that was faster virtually than anybody could hire contractors, architects, engineers, and get through the permitting process. So what do you see on the hillsides of Ventura now? Sure, you see a lot of vacant lots, but guess what? Those in the fire community know that if prior to those types of programs being implemented, what you would have seen even 5 years later are still burnt structures on there. And that's disheartening. But beyond that, let's look at the environmental and the social impact, right? So at 6 months, everybody was able to claim a small sliver of victory because the community was clean. All of that material that was scraped off, removed, and safely disposed of was prevented from going into the watersheds and ultimately in Ventura, of course, rapidly into the ocean. All of that material that would have gone into the air would have been it would have been absorbed into the soil, into the plants, and you would have breathed that in. By doing a consolidated effort, air monitoring was able to be done citywide. Schools were individually monitored. Traffic through towns by all that construction equipment were monitored, organized in a safe fashion. And instead of having 1,100 property owners on their own, hiring contractors to remove the stuff, licensed or unlicensed, it was done in a safe and effective manner, including the disposal properly into landfills and hazardous material sites. So you can look it up, the process is in there. But I know it's been a long day. I want to leave you with a challenge. So when people tell you, okay, after today or tomorrow or after the third day, if you participate, you go to a conference, and what's the first thing people ask you in the office? How was the conference, right? And you say it was fine, and you move on. So the challenge here really is what are you going to tell them about what your experience was? What are you going to share with them? I call it the elevator speech. And I would challenge all of you to think about, what's your elevator speech to talk to your colleagues, to talk to your constituents, to talk to your collaborators out there? Because in that story, not only can you share the knowledge here, but you can build the relationships that every single speaker has talked about here that's so important. No organization can do this alone. Chief Pemlot, my old friend and colleague, talked about how the explosion of fire-safe councils, and some would say, well, that's a lot of work. That's a great thing, right? It takes a lot of people working together. I classify that it's kind of like building a quilt. It takes lots of patches in order for you to get a whole quilt to cover your whole bed, whether you be in recovery or prevention. And it's nice to see this energy and this focus being on prevention, but we could lose that edge really quickly if the funding dries up, if our elected leaders don't hear from you. So when you leave here tonight, during the reception, however, before you go back to your office or your daily routine, think about what your elevator speech is, why it was important for you to be here, why it's important to continue the efforts that you're all doing, the outstanding work, and who you're going to share that information with. Because remember, you may run into a county supervisor. Kelly Long was here earlier. She has a really risky district, as most of you know from this area. You'll run into members of the legislature, your congressman, you might run into the governor, other appointed officials. Those of you that are state appointees know you have to be ready with your elevator speech. You may only get one shot. You may get 30 seconds to make an impression. What are you going to tell them? All right? That's really important. I want to thank all of you for the dedication you have for being here. And a lot of you are doing this as collateral duty or, returning to your community or just love of the cause. Thank you for that. As a resident of California, Ventura County, I'm really proud, as I said, to see those efforts and how many examples were given. But remember, take the elevator speech. If you'd like to hear a little bit more about the Thomas Fire, about the debris removal program and the success of that, I'll be around at the reception afterwards. Again, you'll get copies of this. This is primarily focused on business preparedness and response and recovery, but the basic information is the same. The premise in here is that rather than prepare for individual types of threats, a fire, a flood, tsunami, and all that, prepare for catastrophe, and that'll get you a lot of the way there, because you can scale down, but it's really hard to scale up.